Okay, hello everybody. My name is Matt. I'm going to be your moderator today. So nice to see everyone in the session. Just to make sure you can all hear me, if you could maybe just type hello or something in the chat box, that would be great. Fantastic. Okay, so today's webinar is Critical Thinking in Action with Lindsay Clandfield. I'm just going to take you through a few housekeeping slides first, and then we'll hand over to Lindsay. Okay, don't worry if you can't see any video at the moment. That's off deliberately because you probably don't want to see me, but we'll turn it on when Lindsay starts. Okay, so very briefly, we're using this software. So in the left-hand side, you'll be able to see a list of all the participants in the session. Underneath that is the chat window. Just below that, you have the audio, and then on the right-hand side, this is where the main presentation takes place. If at any point during the session you have an issue with the audio, not sounding good or something, then all you need to do is go to the Tools menu, Audio, and just run the Audio Setup wizard, and that will hopefully clear up any audio issues that you're having. Okay, as I said, in a minute we'll start the video. When it starts, you'll see a video box, and you'll be able to grab the blue bar at the top and move the video around anywhere you want on screen. You can use these two buttons to make the video larger or smaller, depending on how big you want it. And then finally, if at any point you think that the video is looking maybe a bit grainy or it comes out in black and white, just make sure that the quality setting is set to fine color. Sometimes it gets set on coarse gray by accident. So just set it to fine color for the best experience. Okay, you'll have noticed that there is a chat window. You have the option of sending messages to anybody. You can either send to the whole room, or you can send just to the moderators, or you can select an individual participant to send to. Just be aware that we are recording this session, and any messages that get sent, even if they are private ones, will show up in the recorded session. Okay. Final thing before I hand over, we do have a certificate of attendance available, and to find out how to get it, you'll have to watch straight through to the end. So we'll just take a quick break now, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes with Lindsay.
How far down? That's good.
So I'm going to start the video.
You want to start now, right now. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Lindsay Clandfield. Let's just make sure that you can also hear and see me. I've been getting really excited watching where everyone's coming from and seeing what the weather's like where you are. Can you just, again, type in hello or make a noise, bark or something into the chat box. Just type something. Okay, yeah, it's all coming up. Everyone is saying hello. I'm getting things from Canada. We've got people from Argentina, Brazil, Russia, the UK, lots of people from all over the place. So welcome to the webinar, and it's good to see you here today. My webinar is going to be about critical thinking. And to start with, I've got an exercise that I'd like you to do. You're going to have to do it on your own. We won't be able to get feedback from everybody. You'll have to do it on your own. There's a list of words here on the screen: seminar, teaching, watching, chatting, critical. I'd like you to decide yourself which word doesn't go with the other words. Okay? Decide yourselves which word you think doesn't go with the other words. I'll let you do that for 20 seconds there. Eliminate one of those words and think of what reason it is that you've eliminated it. Okay? People are beginning to type the different words that they are eliminating. Someone typed in seminar, another person has typed in seminar. Okay? Someone types in critical. You may have different reasons for it. I'm not going to ask you them right now. You should be down to another 4 words now. So from 5, you should be down to 4. Okay? I'd like you to do it again. With the 4 remaining words, eliminate 1 word, deciding for yourself why you are eliminating it. So you should be down to 3 words. Now, I'm going to pause here because normally I would be doing this with you in class in a face-to-face situation, and I would be asking students in small groups or in pairs to be doing this elimination process. When they eliminate each word, I would ask them to justify why they're eliminating it. Some people said they wanted to eliminate, for example, critical because it's the only adjective, or seminar because it's the only sort of thing, and all the others are actions or adjectives. Many people got down to teaching, watching, chatting. This is when I did it with a group of teachers. And then they eliminated teaching, for example. The point is what I'm asking you to do here is more than just understand what the words mean. I'm asking you to make your own judgment about which word does or doesn't go with the others. In fact, what I'm asking you to do is an exercise in critical thinking. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the session. Okay? So let's just recap this activity. We'll come back to it perhaps a bit later. You choose five words and ask the students to decide 1 which doesn't go with the others. Then there are 4 words left. They can choose any word they want to eliminate as long as they can justify why. Then with the 4 words, you continue down to 3 words. Then with the 3 words, you continue down to 2 words. When you're down to the last 2 words, I ask the students to make as many comparisons between the 2 as possible. Okay? This is a critical thinking exercise in the sense that there is not just one right answer. I'm forcing the students to think and justify themselves why they made the choices they did. So, let's look at critical thinking in general. What I'm going to be doing today is a webinar on this area of critical thinking, and we're going to do a few things. We're going to look at different kinds of critical thinking, and we're going to look at the difference between critical thinking and critical literacy in education. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of these in education, and we can speculate why they're becoming such a hot topic. Then we're going to get to some practical activities. Let me just see here. I think I went ahead too quickly. Yes. We'll look at higher and lower level skills in critical thinking. We'll look at critical thinking in English language teaching and the concept of critical literacy. Then we'll do some practical activities. So, if you're all still with me, let's begin. Critical thinking often takes the form of lists or taxonomies. Probably the most famous taxonomy is the triangle you see here on your right, left, whatever, the triangle with all the colors, which is a variation of what is called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom was an educationalist who made a list of different kinds of thinking skills. The other one, the circle, is a much more detailed version of this taxonomy. Basically, there are different kinds of lists which outline what the critical thinking skills are. But most of them all agree on 2 things, that there are what's called higher level or higher order, and lower order thinking. Now, I've made a slide here where I've got lower order thinking and I've got higher order thinking. And under each category, you can see a list of words. What we're going to do now is I'm going to read you a little bit of a lecture explaining the difference between lower order and higher order thinking, okay? And the words there are there to help you remember this, all right? So let's go. This is taken from an education website, government education website in Queensland. But I could find something very similar also in British education websites and American ones, and several ones around the world. So get ready. We're going to learn the difference between lower order and higher order thinking. Lower order thinking occurs when students are asked to receive or recite factual information or to employ rules through repetitive routines. Students are given knowledge ranging from simple facts and information to more complex concepts. Such knowledge is conveyed to students through a reading, worksheet, lecture, or other direct instructional medium. The instructional process is simply to transmit knowledge or practice routines. Okay? More complex activities may involve reproducing knowledge when students only need to follow pre-specified steps and routines in a rote fashion. Higher order thinking requires students to manipulate information and ideas in ways that transform their meaning and implications. This transformation occurs when students combine facts and ideas to synthesize, generalize, explain, hypothesize, or arrive at some conclusion or interpretation. Manipulating information and ideas allows students to solve problems and discover new meanings and understandings. When students engage in the construction of knowledge, an element of uncertainty is introduced into the instructional process. The teacher is not certain what will be produced by students. In helping students become producers of knowledge, the teacher's main instructional task is to create activities or environments that allow students opportunities to engage in higher order thinking. So, those were two rather meaty paragraphs explaining the difference between lower order and higher order thinking. The way that I have just taught you that, what kind of skills were you using? What kind of instruction were we doing? Okay, so I just taught you about higher order and lower order, but what kind of skills, from what you could see, what were we doing? Higher order or lower order? This was a lower order activity. Basically, I was giving you a lecture. I was transmitting the knowledge directly from me to you with the help of reading it off a page in this case, but I could have done it with a PowerPoint. I could have done it with a video, and you had some notes to help you process that. And if I was going to test you on it, I would ask you maybe to write your own paragraph explaining the difference between higher order and lower order skills. Now, both are valuable, but that was only lower order. Higher order, an exercise in higher order critical thinking would mean something like, looking at this, why do you think higher order critical thinking skills are important in today's society? Okay, I won't be able to get answers from all of you, but the question I would ask you if we were all sitting in a room together is, why is it that people are interested in critical thinking skills, and especially the higher order skills, and especially now in the 21st century? Why do you think that is? When I've done this exercise with teachers, asking them why they think critical thinking and this kind of solving problems, construction of knowledge, coping with uncertainty is attractive now in education, is because we now are operating in a world where getting information isn't the problem anymore. Getting information is easier than it was before. Through the internet, through things like Wikipedia and so on, Google, information is everywhere. But what is more important now is to learn how to sift through that information and make critical choices about the information we're receiving in order to see whether it's true or not, in order to see if there's any bias, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about getting information or being transmitted information, it's what we do with it. And that's what critical thinking is about. Some writers have talked about critical thinking in English language teaching. And they have made 3 areas that they say English language teachers could focus on. One is distinguishing fact from opinion. Okay, that's a kind of a language exercise. We'll look at that later. But students, when they're reading something in a foreign language, should be able to understand the difference between a fact and something that is presented as an opinion. Another is for instructors to challenge people's assumptions that they have. either about language, about society, about different peoples and so on, as we are helping people to communicate with each other across cultures. It could be about challenging assumptions about or stereotypes that people have of each other across cultures. And finally, keeping an open mind to different possibilities and solutions. So these are 3 areas that have been talked about in English language teaching in reference to critical thinking. Critical literacy, and with this slide I come to the end of my theory, critical literacy is slightly different. Critical literacy sees education, and sometimes critical literacy and critical thinking are confused, but critical literacy sees education as a social and political act, okay? And stresses that educators, teachers, should recognize their responsibility as actors in social and political processes and informing of opinions. Critical literacy also imagines other possibilities and realities. It encourages teachers to examine origins and implications of worldviews with students, and to encourage students to question what is presented as universally true. Finally, it's about learning about others and learning about ourselves. I got these from a project on critical literacy that was done by a group of English teachers in Brazil working with the British Council. It was one of the only ones that I had seen that had discussed this area in depth. The idea of looking at our responsibility as educators in terms of a wider political and social spectrum, and in terms of things like learning about others, questioning what is universally presented as true, and so on and so forth. And lots of these things, I think, sit very well with English language teachers. Learning about others, learning about ourselves. Don't we often teach about different cultures and encourage students to look at things in different ways? For the rest of this seminar, I'll look at different activities that I have done in my own teaching and in my writing that take some of the theory of critical thinking and some of the theory of critical literacy. So we're finishing now with the theory part, and we're going to move on to the practical part. All right? So I hope you're all still with me. If I could see you all, I would hopefully see you nodding. But you can always type yes into this chat room if you are still with me. Okay? Not that I can answer you right now. Okay, I can see yeses. Let's keep going. Let's get into practical stuff. Okay? The first I'd like to do is talking about selecting texts and topics. One of the feelings I had when working on the last course book I worked on, which was global, was that a lot of texts presented to learners in language classes didn't really give them the chance to engage critically with information. These were texts that were quite superficial. They were maybe interesting or motivating in a sense, but they didn't really allow students to sort of critically engage with stuff. If I had more time with you, I would show you examples of ones which I think have or haven't dealt critically with issues. When I've done that, though, with teachers, many teachers say that any text could be treated critically. So let's look at how we might do that. I'm going to take a very, very short text with you, and we're going to look at different ways that it could be addressed. First, in a non-critical way, and then in a critical way. Because you don't have time or the ability to read a long extract, I've chosen a very short extract. In fact, I've chosen a one-sentence extract, which I still consider a text because it's a very famous sentence from literature that is quoted often in all kinds of situations and is very recognized, especially in the English-speaking world. Here we go. Oops, sorry. No, made a mistake there, made a mistake. I'm coming to that one in a moment. Let's look at another text, though. The text that I wanted to show you first is an example of a text which I do think can be treated critically. And the activity I'd like you to do is to type into the chat box how you think this sentence ends. Okay? We'll come to the famous quote in a moment. Here's another sentence, another short text. I'd like you to type into the chat box how you think it ends. And here's an example of a sentence which I think is critical. I'll read it for you in case you're all just coming to grips with it here. Only when the last tree has died and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught will we realize that we... Now, I've done this with students before. I asked them to finish a sentence in their own way. You can see in the chat box how people are differently finishing this sentence. This, I think, is already a text and a topic which is critical by definition. I'm asking, I mean, and I'm asking you the way to finish it, to turn it into a critical thinking exercise. We are generating our own meanings for this as you're writing things. Here is the final one. Get ready. It's not very happy, but here we go. Only when the last tree has died and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught will we realize that we cannot eat money. And this is a 19th century Cree Indian proverb. Now I use this in global, in the upper intermediate level, but I've used it with my students as well, and many of them wrote the same kinds of things that you wrote. But this, I find that the original one is quite poetic in the end, but in a sort of, in a really kind of critical way. But then I asked the students to compare their ones with the original ones. Remember that your ones, as long as they made sense grammatically, are just as correct as this one. And then we took the lesson from there. Okay? So, great. This is an example of what I would consider is a text that is critical and a topic that is critical. Let's come back to that thing that I was talking about before, the very famous sentence, and how I'm going to show you it next, and how this could be treated critically and uncritically. Okay? Here's another sentence. Again, if we were doing a longer workshop, I would use longer text, but I won't oblige you to read long things on the screen, not now. Let's take a look. I'll give you a moment to look at this text here. It is a famous sentence. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Okay, so I'm not, I've moved away from the sadness of the last one, and we're into slightly, a little bit merrier, but old. This one is an old one from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Some of you may know this sentence already. Let's look at how we could exploit this sentence in critical and non-critical ways. Let's start with non-critically. I could ask students to rewrite this sentence beginning with the words, everybody knows that, and then they rewrite the sentence so it means the same. Okay? So we're just going for meaning. It's a little bit more critical because I'm asking them to generate their own language for it. Okay? I'm not really asking them to process the ideas. We're just kind of understanding it. Another thing that I could do that wouldn't be critical is spend all my time just going over each individual word. What does acknowledged mean? What does in possession mean? Is a fortune a lot of money or a little bit of money? What does it mean to be in want of something? Okay, now this is what I might do a part of it anyway, to explain what the sentence means. I could, for example, say this is a really famous sentence. It's at the beginning of a very famous book written over 200 years ago by a really famous British author. And she was, she's been quoted a lot, and there have been films made about it. And I think Keira Knightley was in a film. Is it Keira Knightley? I'm not sure. But the actresses, famous actresses have acted in these films. Some people love Jane Austen. There's still Jane Austen book clubs today. This is cultural teaching, but it's still not critical. Here's how it could be critical. For example, is this sentence being more unkind to men, more unkind to women, or to both? Now we have two possibilities here. I don't really know. I mean, this would be a point of discussion. Is this nastier to men or to women? Another one is, this sentence was written 200 years ago. Do you think this sentence could still be true today in your society? Okay, not just in British society. This was written about British society 200 years ago. Is this true about Russian, American, wherever you are, Argentinian society today? Could someone still say this now? And third, leading on to that, what are the ingredients of a good marriage then? Is marriage still important now as it was? And if it is, what are the ingredients that make something a good marriage? Those last three questions are, I think, more addressing critical thinking skills as well as critical literacy than than the others. And my colleague is laughing at all your great comments here, all right, which are being all, by the way, remember they're being all recorded for posterity, so just be careful with your fingers on the keyboards there. But this is what I mean about the difference between treating a text uncritically and critically. Okay, let's keep going if you're ready. Again, one other thing I'd like to mention is that I find that literature is particularly good for doing the critical thinking activities, partly because it offers sort of a vehicle for the teacher and the students to kind of come together on. They're not talking about something that's universally true. We're trying to guess what the author means and then extrapolate that for ourselves. Okay, remember at the beginning of my talk in the theoretical part, I said that in ELT, people have said that one way to teach critical thinking skills is to ask students to distinguish between fact and opinion. Let's look at two exercises which do this, one simple one and one more difficult one. The first one is a simple one. This is all about Alaska. Okay, we can see an image of the seal of the state of Alaska, and then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences. Okay, you can see the 7 sentences about Alaska. I did this activity with students, and I called the text Key Facts About Alaska. And students read it, and we made sure they understood it. And then I said, which ones aren't facts? Which ones are probably opinions? This is an easy activity. I'll let you read them first. Should be very easy to see that number 3 is an opinion. That's clearly an opinion. Number 5 is as well, and number 7. Okay? That still is quite easy. We could ask students, why do you know that they're opinions? You know, words like great, also the things like the friendliest, the superlative there, the comparative, it's nicer than cold weather in other places. What's interesting is when I made this activity, it was in the middle of the 2008 presidential campaign, the US presidential campaign, and there was a woman running for vice president from Alaska. Type the name if you know who I'm talking about. The woman who ran for vice president against Obama, prize to the first person who types the name. She was from Palin, yes. All right, Sarah Palin was running for vice president with John McCain, and she was from Alaska. And I found this sort of pamphlet or website or things like that. She was governor of Alaska, where it said facts about Alaska. And they included things a bit like this. Friendliest people in America, best place to live, and so on, as well as other more mundane facts. But these were opinions, again, being presented as facts. Let's look at another example, though, where it's a bit more complex. Okay? We're going to look at a text about lotteries. And again, I'm going to present you some facts about lotteries. With my students, I would give maybe 10. But because of the size of the screen, I'm only going to give you 3. Okay? Here are 3 facts about lotteries. I will give you a moment to read them. Now, in this one, I had a group of 10 of these kinds of facts. Now, in this case, after we do the comprehension, I didn't ask the student which ones are opinions and which ones are facts. Rather, I told them that these facts come from 3 different places. The first was from Wikipedia. The second source was from a website, from a business magazine's website about the benefits of lotteries to national governments. And the third was from an anti-gambling website, which had a fact sheet called The True Facts About Lotteries. Now remember that with the students there were more than 3, there were maybe 10. And then I asked the students, now you understand them, which fact comes from which source? Okay? So what we're doing here is now asking the students to think critically about who was using what fact to support their agenda or lack of agenda. You can probably see which one came from Wikipedia. Was the first one. The second one was from the anti-gambling website about the facts about lotteries. And the third one was from the business press about the benefits of lotteries for national governments. So you gather a whole bunch of these from different sources and ask the students to decide which source was quoting which fact. I did this with lotteries. If you wanted to do it, you could, two areas that are really good on this are oil. So find any fact sheets on companies such as Shell or Exxon or British Petroleum. They'll have their own fact sheets, and then find an anti-oil website. Tobacco, or specifically about banning smoking in public places. So if you're in a country where smoking was banned recently in all public places, there are probably some websites which have facts about how this is going to hurt the economy, how all the restaurants will close, how bars will not be able to keep going if they can't have the smokers in them, and so on. And there'll be the anti-tobacco websites as well. So you need Wikipedia, a positive site which has like facts kind of supporting something, and a site which has facts attacking something. Mix those all up together, and you have a worksheet which can do critical thinking on deciding about facts, opinions, and so on. Okay. Let's look at language work. Sorry, I'll come to that slide in a moment. I think that critical thinking can also be done with very simple language activities. Here's an example of a lesson that I did in global, I think upper intermediate, on conditionals, that I also did with some students, where we made sentences. This is one of those sentence-making machines where, for example, there are several columns and you have to make logical, grammatical sentences. Okay, I'll let you take a look at it. By the way, the lesson was all about the American dream. So they had read a text about what the American dream meant, or the original idea of the American dream, and we talked a bit about that. And then they had done this exercise. They had learned about the conditionals. We reviewed our conditionals, and then we looked at this exercise. Now, in this exercise, the students have to make sentences from the words. And here, the critical aspect of this is I ask them to make 2 sentences that they agree with and 2 sentences that they do not agree with. So for example, you can make lots of money if your parents are rich. Or you can make lots of money if you work hard. Here, that's a typical one. Your children will make lots of money if your parents are rich, for example. Your children won't have a good life even if they are rich, and so on. Just look at that yourself and see if you can make 1 or 2 sentences that you agree or disagree with. Feel free, if you're quick on the typing, you can type it in. Type in a sentence there that you think is a good one. So you will be happy providing you are beautiful. You can make lots of money providing you are smart. There's one from Jane. You can be happy even if your parents are poor. Yes, exactly. You can't be happy unless you are smart. Essentially here, the first part of the exercise is just to make the sentences. The second part, the more critical thinking part, is to try to find sentences that you agree with or don't agree with. And all of these, incidentally, do relate in one way or another to the idea of a national dream. For example, the American dream, you can have a good life if you work hard, or sort of that work ethic. or you can be rich if you work hard. You can have anything you want, providing you want. You can have anything. You can be anything, providing you want it. So there's all these kind of sentences that are very much in that sort of national psyche, in a way, of sort of the culture of a nation. Okay, so here's another one. You can be happy even if you are poor. And then someone else wrote, you can't be happy if you are poor. The idea here is getting students to think critically about ones that they agree with and ones they don't agree with. It's one of my favorite activities to do with them. It always generates a lot of talk and is very, very meaning-based. Let's look at another one here. Let's look at the passive. Okay? Here is an example of a very simple, straightforward passive activity. Transformation, another transformation. So I'll just get you to read this and then do the transformation in your head of the text. So transform the underlined sentences to the passive. Now, if I wasn't doing this activity critically, I would only get the students to transform it and then check to see if the grammar is correct. So, restore, your photographs have been lost. They are usually kept in a box on the table. You know, next student, tell me what the next sentence is. Good, you got it right, and so on. The critical thing to do with this is that compare this one with the one that you've just rewritten in the passive. And what is sounding different? What is different about this whole text now? What is the use of the passive done? How is it changing the meaning of the text? What is the sense now? I'll let someone write it in. There's formality. It sounds more official. There's partly that. It's more formal, but there's something else going on as well. Yes, Barbara and Anastasia have just said, you absolve yourself of responsibility. It's a way of avoiding responsibility. So this was actually based on a letter that I'd received about something of mine that was lost, that was all written in the passive. Your photographs have been lost. Well, no one is saying who lost them. It's either not known, or they don't want to say, or so on and so forth. And so looking at the example of the passive in this example, like this, is getting students to recognize that the passive can be used to avoid or disclaim something or avoid responsibility for something by taking out the direct we. This is especially used by governments, military campaigns, and so on. We regret that some people were killed, and so on and so forth. That's a heavier one. I used a lighter example here, but the principle remains the same. One of the uses of the passive, looking critically at language, is to absolve oneself of responsibility. And it is more formal, but it puts more distance. The other part of it is putting more distance between the speaker and the action. So that's another example of critical look at language. Okay, we can also do things with images. Okay, I'd like you all to take a look at this image and type in things that you can see. So this is a slight little bit of interaction. Just type in, I can see, and what can you see? Yes, everyone there. Here it comes: sand, mountains in the background, a desert, blue sky, clouds, sound, tufts of grass, and so on. Right. What I'm doing with you in an online version here is a typical describe the picture activity. Yes, you know, for if I had two pictures of deserts, maybe it would be describe the differences between the two. A bit like in our international exam activities, yes, describing pictures. One way to do something like this, encouraging critical thinking, is the following. I won't get you to do it, but I'll talk you through it. I put the students into groups of 3, and I project this image on the board. Then I ask each student to decide if they're A, B, or C. Okay? I ask all the A's to raise their hands. I say, A's, describe the picture to B's in 40 seconds. I then watch for 40 seconds, let them describe the picture, a bit like how you were doing it. You know, there I can see a desert, there's some grass, there's a mountain, etc. Then I say stop. Then I ask the B's, B's, put up your hands. I say, B's, I want you to describe your picture, but I'm giving you a role. You come from a very hot desert country, and you've always hated it. It's made you grumpy. You were always ill from the sand and the dry weather as a child. You had trouble breathing and so on. And you've always dreamt of leaving this country to go and live somewhere else. In fact, you now do live somewhere else, and this picture reminds you of your childhood, being ill, growing up, and so on. So now describe the picture to your partners for 40 seconds. They describe for 40 seconds, but the description is slightly changing. They're looking at it from a different perspective now, of someone who really doesn't like it. Then C's, I say, you grew up in a cold, wet, rainy country, and your dream has always been to see the gold sands of the desert. Describe this picture to your partners. Now they describe it as well. Again, I'm doing this with slightly higher level, not elementaries, but slightly higher level students, and they describe it from that perspective. So here I'm asking students to do the same description, but from different points of view. Finally, for fun, I often ask A's to describe the picture again, saying, you have been walking here for 2 days and you are almost out of food and water, and you finally got a signal on your mobile phone. Make a phone call and describe where you are to the person who answers. So that's sort of a bit of a fun way to wrap up that activity. But essentially, using just one picture, we've looked at it from different angles in a kind of role play activity. And then we go over perhaps some of the language used to describe the picture from different perspectives. So this works really well with pictures of deserts, with pictures of very cold places, with pictures of big cities, with pictures of tiny villages, anything like that where it's kind of an extreme, one extreme or another, getting students to take turns describing it from a different point of view. So looking at the same thing from different points of view. We're coming to the end here of my webinar. There was one other area that I was interested in, and it's an area that I've explored in Global as well, which is not just learning English, but learning about English. And that also means, if I'm taking the critical thinking angle, thinking critically about why we are learning English, why our students are learning English. Why is it the international language? Why not something else? Is it a good thing? And the kind of questions that I wanted to encourage in classrooms occasionally for higher level class discussions were prompted by essays that David Crystal, one of the world's top linguists, wrote for the course Global. He wrote a whole series of mini essays called Global English. And they dealt with different issues, but some of the questions that came up, and I've used these in class, are things like, does English threaten other languages? Do you think it threatens other local languages in your country? I live in Spain, where we've had quite animated conversations about whether or not English is beneficial or is it threatening to some of the other smaller local languages and dialects in Spain. There's a language called Globish, which was nothing to do with global in my book, but it's a language that was proposed by a French businessman of a simplified form of English. There have been a few simplified Englishes proposed. And one discussion you could have with students is it a good idea? Because we are all now learning English around the world, would it be a good idea for us to have a simplified form of English? What would be arguments in favor of that or against that? Similarly, would it be a good thing if everyone spoke the same language? Is that a utopia that we should have in the world? Is that what we should be aiming for, that everybody speaks English, as well as their own languages, but everyone has a common language? Most people would say yes. The critical part would be to say, try to think of some reasons why people would say no to this. Do you think it's unfair that English is the international language? My wife is French, so she sometimes says it is a bit unfair. But there are other major languages. Why is it that English is the international language? Why does it have to be English? Should it be another language? If so, what other language? Could there be another? Will we all speak Chinese in 100 years? These are other sort of discussion questions. And finally, is it a good idea for all children to learn English? This is a question that could get quite critical as people are debating whether or not you drop the age of learning English down to 4, down to 3, down to 2. What does that mean for the child's first language, their native, their mother tongue? So these are the kind of things that I think also can be engaged in English class. It is our topic, and it's also, I think, our responsibility to think of these ourselves, but perhaps also discuss them with students. I'm coming to the end of my webinar. There will be a couple of moments where questions. Are there questions? Yeah, not yet. There might be some questions. If you have questions, I might have a couple of minutes to answer them. Just wanted to tell you I've been talking about referring to Global. If you don't know what Global it is a course book that I'm the lead author on with a group of authors. It's a course book for adults, and one of the first course books, I think, to systematically address critical thinking through the texts and topics and selection of images in the course. All the texts and topics that we saw in this workshop and the seminar come from Global. We do critical analysis of text and language, so not just the passive and conditionals. We do a lot on politics, politician speeches and so on, especially at higher levels. We look critically at English as an international language with some of those questions that I showed you. We use literature a lot in a kind of critical way, like we did with the Jane Austen text. And finally, we get students to think critically about how they learn through a study skills syllabus. So thinking about what works best for you, and looking at other ways of learning things, using dictionaries, recording vocabulary, improving your skills, and learning English outside of the classroom. I think we're just about ready to move on to questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm getting past them. Joe McVeigh says, how to use critical thinking with students with only low levels of English. Well, I think some of those earlier activities, the odd word out activity, I've done with beginner level students. What I did was I told them that they had to use the word in English, but some of their justification they could do in their own language. It was because I was more interested in getting the word to stick through some of the critical thinking skills, so sometimes I let them break into their own language. Other ones about sort of ranking activities and things like that, putting things in different orders where there are many orders possible, I think could be done at lower levels as well. Obviously not the full-blown discussions, but some of them could be done as well. I mean, if you look at some of the examples in Global Elementary, you would see some of how they can be at lower levels. I was talking more about higher levels on this webinar. Michael asked, how do students respond to critical thinking, intense critical thinking tasks? Well, in my experience, they've responded quite well. I mean, not every single discussion has always become critical, not in the class. We don't always do it. But often I found with students, and I'm working often with adults and university tertiary level students, that after an initial period, and again this is borne out by colleagues of mine who were doing this in places like Turkey, in Germany, after an initial period of a bit of resistance, some of them really got quite into it. So again, it's like anything. Some activities will work better with others, with certain groups. Should a student, Pavel asks, should a student always have a critical task in mind before reading a text? Some people have suggested that yes, one of the things that when reading a text is, the first critical thought is, where does this text come from? Who is it aimed at? And what is the purpose of this text? Sometimes it's very easy. And many of the texts in course books, the purpose is to inform. but sometimes you may have texts that persuade or they're literary texts. I think it's a good idea to have some kind of, even a simple one, like what is the purpose of this text, what is it doing, what is the author's main point of this text as part of comprehension, but also part of thinking critically. Liliana asks, can we use global at a university for teaching English at an upper intermediate level? Of course you can. I'm so glad you asked. Yes, you'd have to follow up on this with Macmillan afterwards. But yes, it is written for tertiary university and adult students. And I think that's pretty much all we have time for. Of course, thank you very much for joining, and just finish up here with a couple of things. Just the last thing about Global, we're very pleased to announce that it was the winner of the English-Speaking Union's Book Award from the Duke of Edinburgh, and that Global was a nominee for the British Council ELTON Innovation Awards. So we've been quite pleased with that. That's my little sort of happy thing to say at the end of the talk. I'd also like to finish by thanking all of you for tuning in. Thanking you if you're watching this not live, because this will be recorded and uploaded to the internet, so it could be watched again later. And look forward to hopefully seeing you at a conference somewhere or another.